الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطاهرين صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. I would first like to begin by telling you that I'm never nervous at the microphone, but today I am, and that is because my teachers are sitting behind me, and to share a stage with Ayatollah Sayyid Milani, it's beyond humbleness and humility. And so with your permission, the both of you, and please forgive that my back is to you. I really apologize for that. I'd like to move the podium. And to my respected brother and mentor, Professor Dr. Talal Turfa. Hassan, thank you so much for the introduction. To the Ummah crew, I would like to say thank you so very, very much for the 13th Ummah conference. We started this many, many years, 13 years ago, in a telephone conference with many of us. Alhamdulillah, every year it's been growing, and I really, really am proud of what's happening here and the organizers, all of them. So a collective salawat ala Muhammadan for everyone whose hand has touched this conference. So I'm going to put my clock on. I'll be speaking to you, inshallah, with you for the next 20 minutes or so about the idea of Karbala. And this idea that I was given was Karbala for the Shia only? And I think that we very much know the answer to that is no. Although I do believe that sometimes we hold Imam Hussein exclusive to us, and I think that's a little bit of a problem in the sense that absolutely the message is universal, and absolutely that if the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy to all of mankind, his family is included in that by divine decree. So to imagine that Imam Hussein ﷺ belongs to the Shia and the Shia only is absolutely a very, very sad notion. But I would say that I don't think we do a very great job of taking him outside of our circles, and I think that's where we can definitely improve. And I want to speak to you a little bit about that today. The second part of the question was, how do we apply the message today? What is the application of the message today? So, you know, I'm one who likes to speak with the audience, not to the audience. So we're going to take a moment of pause, and I'm going to ask you that question. Because everyone internalizes Imam Hussein, many of us in a similar way, but also he has so many distinct things about himself and the issue in Karbala. So I'm asking you something. When you think about the message of Imam Hussein, and just say it loudly, for you, what is the message of Imam Hussein? If you were presenting it to the world and you had a shot at the microphone, you had a sound bite, what would you say the message is? Somebody please begin. Pardon me? Sacrifice. Justice. Strength. Stand up against the oppressive. Sisters in the back, you have to speak loud. Sacrifice. Dignity. Humanity. Tawheed. One more time. Trust in God. Patience. Pardon me? Courage. Islam. Islah? I can't hear you. Reform. Islah. Is that? Okay. What else? Honor. Values. Truth. Togetherness. Fairness. Louder. I can't. To save Islam. Okay. Yeah, sometimes we do. One of the beautiful things about hijab is that it prevents you from hearing sometimes. Rebellion against the Sultan. Against the Khalifa. So for every one of us, and for collectively, we all agree on these things, but also he has a personal thing with us, right? We have this personal relationship with Imam Hussein. And it comes and goes in different ways and fashion and form depending on what's going on in our own lives as well. This is one of the blessings of Ahlul Bayt. For every member of Ahlul Bayt, there's someone you can attach to. There's a lesson that can be taught. So I was thinking about, so ultimately, how do we apply the message? So ultimately, if we collectively take what you've said in terms of values, ultimately it boils down to a moral message. Would you agree? And that moral message is essentially evil versus good. That is essentially what it is in its purest form. It's protecting the good, it's forbidding the evil. Would you agree? And then it manifests itself in the many things that you said. But in order to apply the message, we have to look at the messenger of the message, do we not? So what is it about Imam Hussein? What did he fully embody that gave him the ability to carry out what he had to endure in Karbala? Now, this is just my own personal thought, and you will have your own personal thoughts. But what I believe he embodied essentially, three main things, was a consciousness, a commitment, and character. And when you combine these three things together, you can move the world. And he did. So let's examine that a little bit more deeply. A consciousness of what? What did Imam Hussein have that allowed him to never have doubt? Someone said earlier, Tawheed. He had a consciousness of the divine. He knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a very, very special way. His connection with Allah, his creed, his conviction, everything about him, his consciousness and his subconsciousness were fully committed to Allah. He used the upper brain and the lower brain, if you want to break it down into just absolute physiological terms. Why is that necessary when you want to have a movement or when you want to stand up for something? Because the consciousness influences the subconsciousness. Our subconscious or our lower brain is all about fight or flight. Our lower brain is where our animal instinct is. Our upper brain, the higher level of consciousness, where Imam Hussein was able to absolutely visualize his mission and understand what his course was going to be in life. That ability for the conscious to take over the subconscious and to rule the subconscious is one of the most powerful things any leader can have. It is what makes the difference. It's why a leader becomes a leader and why movements happen, how revolutions for the good happen, is because that person has embodied a consciousness that speaks to the subconscious. He doesn't fight and he doesn't flight. What he actually does is he realizes things in a higher realm. Nothing can touch this person because their commitment, their conviction, their character is tied only to the divine. What do I mean by that? When we tell the story of Karbala, we talk about the 30,000 troops. Some say more. Do you really think Imam Hussein looked at the 30,000 and said, oh my God, there's 30,000 men in front of me? He knew what he was going to. So it doesn't make sense to me that when we say that Imam Hussein stood in front of 30,000 men, sometimes we paint that story as though he had the courage to stand. Of course he had the courage to stand. But that dilutes it. It's way more than courage. It's conviction. It's a consciousness of God. He doesn't see the 30,000 because that's this kind of visual thing. He sees this. He doesn't see this. So those 30,000, even if they were 100,000, they cannot shake Imam Hussein. It doesn't matter how many they were in numbers. The number that did matter to him is the 72 who were with him. Not what was in front of him, what was behind him. Why? Because he cared deeply about the people who were about to sacrifice themselves with him. Now, I'm not saying he didn't care about the 30,000. He cared, to the point where he even gave them a lecture in his speech and asked them to redeem themselves. He offered them a mercy before the battle even started. Why? Because his consciousness is tied to a higher thing. God consciousness, in the highest, most supreme, most sublime way, a leader does not see himself. A leader only sees Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a big stretch for people like me and you to get to. It really is. But to say that, well, Imam Hussein was infallible and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him all of these traits and characteristics and this was the will of Allah and Allah inoculated Imam Hussein with everything he needed to go forward means that Imam Hussein would have been a robot. I will not buy that. I will not accept that. Imam Hussein also developed his own character, his character of strength, his character of piety, his knowledge of the divine, the sublime, sublime knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So this right consciousness of the divine. The second thing I was speaking about earlier was this commitment to justice. Now, if you have a commitment to something, it comes from someplace. Have you ever thought about where commitment comes from? Think about it. Where does commitment come from? Where's it formulated? How do you get that? You get that, again, from the conscious talking to itself. It talks, it speaks to the subconscious. And in commitment, in that strong, strong commitment, what happens, especially with justice, which Imam Hussein was all about justice, Imam Hussein tied himself to one of Allah's attributes. And isn't one of Allah's attributes justice? So because he doesn't see himself, he sees Allah, his commitment is strong and it's unwavering. So what does it mean to have this commitment? Commitment requires vision, and vision requires passion. And when you work with vision, that means, especially when your upper brain is conquering your lower brain, that your vision, your direction, your conviction, your commitment is so crystal clear that it takes on a life of its own. It feeds itself this own kind of energy, because that's what passion and vision do. They have their own energy, and they come from the core of a human being. And when someone is committed, they cannot look back. They cannot accept anything else. They can't. They can't. Their core doesn't allow them to. Why? Because they've trained their brain. They've trained their conscious to conquer their subconscious. So they have very crystal clear vision and direction and goals. So much so that that person, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, not only was his body walking to Karbala, not only his heart, his eyes, his ears, his senses. When you are committed and you have a vision and a passion, everything in you works at it and for it. The way you speak, the way you see, the way you hear, the way you process, the decisions that you make, and they're uncompromising. You can't compromise those values. Why? Because something in your core has changed. The way you think at that higher level has been developed. You've conquered the self. You've conquered the animal. You've conquered the lower brain. It's very, very powerful things if you really think about it. Imam Hussein clearly had that. Clearly. And then the last of it is this idea of right character. You know, I was thinking a little while ago, just this afternoon when I was thinking about this. I want to make sure that I don't go over my time. I was thinking that we think about Yazid, Hussein. Yazidis, Husseinis. We think about who Imam Hussein, alayhi salam, just the DNA, and Rasulullah says that he is of Hussein and Hussein is of him. So, I mean, to imagine that the embodiment of this message is in the Prophet himself, that the selfless Hussein was raised by the Prophet himself, that he came with the mission to free his grandfather's ummah of oppression, of tyranny, of these types of things. That this embodiment of the merciful Allah sending mercy to all of humanity versus Yazid, whose DNA is so messed up, and that's a kind word, who rooted in his DNA are the actual enemies of the Prophet himself. Do we really think Imam Hussein is scared of Yazid? No, absolutely not. His stand was to reserve, to restore, to preserve the lofty, those pristine principles that protect the good and forbid the evil. So that message today, how is that played out? And I challenge you, I challenge myself. On a daily basis, there are things that happen around us, injustices galore. There is hunger in the world. What do we do about it? There is thirst in the world. Earlier today, one of the doctors, Dr. Cole, spoke about water, basically water battles. Imam Hussein laid near the Euphrates River and still died thirsty. So what about the injustice of water and thirst and the inequity of those who have much and those who have little? What do we do about that? Do you do anything about that? Inshallah you do. But do you think about it? Because we can't carry this message of Imam Hussein and say, does Karbala apply today? And just look at it and say, oh my God, the world's a mess. Look at what's happening in Yemen, look what's happening in Iraq, look what's happening in Syria. There's ISIS, there's tyrants, this was happening in our own communities. We can't just say that and then just sit back and fold our hands. We can't do that. Then don't call yourself a Husseini. I'm serious about this. I'm a little hard on this issue. I'll tell you why. I didn't grow up with Imam Hussein. I found him. I grew up in Dearborn, but I did not know about Imam Hussein. And I grew up at one of the largest Islamic centers in America. Hussein wasn't talked about. And where has Shia become? I didn't find out about Imam Hussein until I was 36 years old. So the internal message of Hussein is one thing, and the external message of Hussein is another thing. And we have to be cognizant of the public. Why would we not want to teach the University of Hussein? Why would we not? You just talked about all of the wonderful, beautiful things it is. Did you not? Wouldn't you want to share that? The way we share it internally is one thing, but to think you can share it externally the way we share it internally is a mistake. Because you can't cry for Hussein, you can't do latam for Hussein if you don't understand who Hussein is. The story needs to be told before the eyes see the marches. This is my personal opinion. We have to start spreading the story. And the human mind is attracted to stories. A Swami from India, 1913, is quoted as saying, "The hardest heart will melt when he hears the story of Hussein." Well, alhamdulillah, now there's going to be a beautiful movie about Imam Hussein. And these are the kinds of things that we need to do. I'm going to tell you a story about how far personally I have come. This is a funny story. It's kind of sad, but it's kind of funny. It was, I don't know, so probably 1996 or something like that. We were still located in our original mosque in Detroit. And my husband and I went to Ashura for one of the first times. Mind you, we grew up Shia. Well, there was an imam there at the time who was from Iran. As an American-born Muslim, I did not know the traditions that many of you know from Pakistan and from Iraq and from wherever we all come from about the traditions of Ashura. I had never seen it before. So I go to the masjid, and the lights are low, and my husband, also born here like myself, we're standing next to each other, and there's candles, and everyone's in black, and everyone is crying, and my husband looks at me, and I look at him, and he says, "It's a takeover." And I said, "Oh my God, it's a takeover." I felt like I was in a cult. I had never seen this before. Now, mind you, I'm an Arab girl growing up in a Shia community to a fairly religious family, and I'm not exposed to that. And that's Najah Bazzy, who's growing up in a Shia community. What do you think happens with Mr. Mike, redhead, when he sees some of the ways that we may do things? Do you think that that is appealing? It puts a lot of question marks. So my point is, now on the day of Ashura, I'm on the floor listening to my imam tell the maqtal, and I can't even breathe. I can't even breathe from the pain that I feel, the tears that I shed. My whole soul is crying. Every cell in my body is crying. Every consciousness I have belongs to Hussein. But I didn't get there because I went to that particular memorial. I got there because an imam educated me, because he told us the stories. And I really don't know why my phone is doing that. It says time is done. So what I want to say in conclusion, if we want the message to be relevant, tell the story, number one. Number two, to remember the three pristine things that make any leader a leader, embodied in Imam Hussein, the most sublime message of all, right? This consciousness of the divine, this commitment to justice, and this character that is unwavering and steadfast, and to remember who we really truly belong to. And what I've learned from Imam Hussein and from Sayyida Zainab and from all of Ahlul Bayt, and of course from the Prophet and the prophets before them, the lesson that we learn is, what is our direction? What is our compass? When it's this way, nothing can touch me. Nothing can hurt us. Nothing can do that to us, because nothing can own our souls, because we've submitted that part of ourselves to the divine. And so in that kind of storytelling, it's a very attractive, inspirational story that we have in our hands. We need to gift it to the non-Muslim audiences. We need to gift it to our Sunni brothers and sisters. We need to gift it to more Shias themselves. It is a gift. It's a jewel. And to keep it exclusive to us and to cry on the day of Ashura is not enough. It just simply is not enough. It means that we're really falling short of the message. So stand up and stand united and stand for what's right. And I'm with you in that stand. And I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have Imam Hussein standing for us, waiting for us to embrace those of us who uphold his message with tears and our action. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.